What if buried deep inside your blood was evidence of an empire that history forgot? They conquered by sword, paved roads across mountains, etched their gods in mosaics, and yet left almost nothing behind in our DNA. This is Morocco's Roman paradox. You walk the cracked marble roads of Volubilis, once home to temples, baths, Latin inscriptions, built under Emperor Claudius after he annexed Mauritania Tingitana in 44 AD. This city was the western edge of one of the most powerful empires in history. Volubilis was no outpost. It minted coins, enforced Roman law, and by the 2nd century even enjoyed municipium status, meaning its citizens had Roman rights. In places like Sala Colonia, modern Rabat, and Tingis Tangier, Rome was not just a visitor, it was embedded. And yet, when modern geneticists sequence the genomes of Moroccan men, especially from indigenous Amazigh, Berber communities, they find something staggering. Over 80% of Y chromosome markers trace back to haplogroup EM81, a lineage native to North Africa for over 14,000 years. Meanwhile, the so-called Roman signature haplogroup R1b sits at just 2 to 3%. That's less than a trace, barely a whisper. How can an empire so present in stone be so absent in blood? Because power doesn't always pass through genes. The Romans built towns, appointed Berber elites, taxed the land. But their presence was elite-driven, not population-wide. Most Roman settlers in Morocco were not from Rome itself, but from Hispania, Iberia, and they were few. The 20,000 people who lived in Volubilis? Archaeological estimates suggest only 10 to 20% were of Roman or Iberian origin. The rest, Amazigh, local, indigenous. This is what scientists call a genetic palimpsest, like an ancient scroll rewritten over and over where earlier stories are still faintly visible beneath the new ink. Cultural dominance didn't mean demographic overhaul. DNA doesn't remember glory. It remembers who stayed, who married, who bore children. And in Morocco, that wasn't the Romans. They left their statues, but not their sons. But if Rome didn't rewrite the genome of this land, then whose legacy does lie buried beneath their cities? Long before Carthage or Rome, a people stood in Taforalt, and their DNA still speaks, buried not beneath cities but in a cave called Grotta des Pigeons near Taforalt in northeastern Morocco. Hidden behind layers of limestone and time, this place, silent for thousands of years, was finally opened in 2018 by a team of international geneticists and archaeologists. What they found wasn't just ancient, it was revolutionary. Human remains dating back 15,000 years, and for the first time in African science, nuclear DNA was extracted from those bones. Not just fragments, not just guesses, whole strands of genetic memory. This was the oldest genome ever sequenced from the African continent, and its results shocked the world. The people of Taforalt didn't belong to any one region. Their DNA was a fusion, a 2/3 ancestry related to Natufians of the ancient Levant, and 1/3 from a deep sub-Saharan African lineage never before recorded. A hybrid population, a bridge between continents. Living proof of an early back-to-Africa migration from Eurasia, thousands of years before the Neolithic age even began. And within these bones was a single Y chromosome lineage that still pulses in modern veins. EM81, the Berber bloodline. This haplogroup, believed to have emerged around 14,200 years ago in North Africa, has withstood every empire, every invasion. From Phoenician ports to Roman towns to Arabized dynasties, EM81 still dominates in rural Berber communities, reaching over 80% prevalence in some regions. This is not a ghost. This is genetic endurance. While Roman generals left statues and Phoenician traders left amphorae, the men of Taforalt left a code, unbroken. Even today in the mountains of the Rif, the Atlas, the anti-Atlas, this lineage survives. These weren't kings, they weren't conquerors, but they lasted. Their story wasn't written in stone. It was written in cells, and it remained there, untouched until science finally caught up. But when the Phoenicians arrived from the east, they didn't just bring goods, they brought identity. Or did they? They built temples, ruled the seas, and yet the DNA of the Phoenicians almost disappeared. Why? For centuries, we believed the Phoenicians seeded their identity across the Western Mediterranean. From Tyre and Sidon to Carthage to the ports of Morocco. But what if that entire belief was wrong? Because in 2025, a landmark genomic study shocked the world. Across more than 200 ancient Punic remains taken from Tunisia, Algeria, Sicily, and even the ruins of Carthage itself, researchers found almost no trace of Levantine DNA. The people we call Phoenician? They weren't from Phoenicia. Their genetic signatures looked more like Aegean islanders, Sicilians, Iberians, locals. The expansion wasn't biological, no, it was economic. A trade network, a brand, a mask, and the shock doesn't stop there. In Carthage, in a crypt beneath the Bursa hill, a young man was buried, 6th century BCE. His remains were mummified, carefully preserved. But when scientists sequenced his mtDNA, they didn't find a trace of Lebanon or Tyre or the Levant. They found haplogroup U5B2C1, a European maternal lineage more common in the Iberian Peninsula than the Middle East. This was the young man of Byrsa, and his genome threw everything into question. Because this wasn't a Phoenician migrant. He was someone born of European blood, possibly adopted into a Carthaginian elite or the child of a mixed merchant family. He didn't descend from Canaan, he descended from the sea. And yet, the Phoenicians did come to Morocco. From the 9th to the 6th century BCE, they built trading ports across the Moroccan coast. Lixus, Mogador, Salah, Tingis. These weren't fortresses, they were warehouses, salt factories, fish sauce vats. Temples to Baal stood beside open-air dyeing pits. But while the temples remained, their bloodlines faded. So where did they go? Historians now suspect the truth. Phoenician migration to Morocco wasn't a mass movement. It was led by a few families, traders, priests, administrators, who blended with locals, adopted local wives, and left behind only faint genetic whispers. The cultural legacy, massive. The genetic impact, barely measurable. But in coastal Morocco, a hidden genetic signal remains, and it might be the Phoenicians' final whisper. What if Phoenician DNA still lingers, not in names or ruins, but in a specific strand passed father to son? For centuries, archaeologists chased statues and tablets. They mapped ports and pottery, traced shipping lanes across the Mediterranean. But the real evidence, the proof of presence, was never in what the Phoenicians left behind. It was in what they left within. In 2008, a landmark genetic study led by Chris Tyler Smith at the Wellcome Trust Sanger Institute revealed something astonishing. Researchers found a cluster of 6 Y chromosome markers, PCS1+ to PCS6+, tied directly to Phoenician male lineages. These weren't just ancient, they were precise. found within haplogroup J2, a paternal lineage common in the eastern Mediterranean. And then something strange happened. These markers, especially J2PH3959 and J2M410, began to surface in unexpected places, along the Atlantic coast of Morocco, in communities near Lixus, Mogador, Salah, and Tangier, all former Phoenician colonies, all far from Lebanon. In some of these Moroccan coastal towns, J2 frequencies reach up to 6%. Not overwhelming, but not random either. Not a trace left by conquerors, but by traders, settlers, husbands, men who arrived with ships, stayed for generations, and disappeared into the crowd. Even deeper, researchers noticed maternal lineages, mitochondrial DNA haplogroups H, J, T, and V, flowing in from the Eurasian pool. Evidence of marriages, not just markets. Families built on the edge of the empire. In genetics, this is called isolation by distance. When small groups settle in coastal pockets and their lineages survive for centuries, undisturbed, carried through generations like hidden code, invisible until unlocked by modern science. So while the cultural signature of the Phoenicians may have faded, in their alphabet, in their temples, a genetic ghost remains, especially along Morocco's edge. It whispers not from stone, but from cells. But any Phoenician signal would soon be drowned out by a far greater demographic wave, the Romans. The Romans came with roads and law, but left with barely a drop of DNA. In 44 AD, after the death of King Ptolemy of Mauritania, Emperor Claudius annexed the kingdom and carved it into 2 imperial provinces, Mauritania Tingitana in the west and Mauritania Caesariensis in the east. But this was not just conquest, it was infrastructure, bureaucracy, urban design, a Roman world transplanted into Berber soil. At Volubilis, the empire made its mark, temples to Jupiter, flowing aqueducts, tiled baths, and mosaics that still shimmer under Moroccan sun. This was the outer edge of Rome, closer to the Atlantic than to the Forum. But it walked, spoke, and taxed like the center of empire. Latin inscriptions filled public forums. Markets bustled beneath marble columns. And yet, look closer. The names on the tombstones? Amazigh, Berber, local. The soldiers who patrolled the borders were Iberian auxiliaries, not Roman elites. The traders? Native. The households? Hybrid. Archaeological studies estimate that in cities like Volubilis, only 10 to 20% of the population was of Roman or Iberian descent. The rest were local inhabitants, absorbed into the legal and economic machinery of empire, but not biologically replaced by it. And the DNA confirms it. In modern Morocco, the signature of haplogroup R1b, common in Roman and Western European populations, appears in just 2 to 3% of the male population. Statistically irrelevant, if Rome had reshaped this land with its blood, the evidence would be undeniable. Instead, we see the continued dominance of EM81, the Berber Y chromosome. Rome ruled with laws and roads, but it did not rewrite the genome. It administrated. It did not assimilate. This was an empire of forms, not of fathers. Because sometimes the empire doesn't change who you are, it just puts a new stamp on your passport. But even Rome fell, and with its fall came a brief storm from the north. In 429 AD, a Germanic storm swept across Roman Africa. But did the Vandals leave a legacy in our genes? They weren't from this land. They didn't speak its languages. And yet, in the spring of 429 AD, over 80,000 Vandals, men, women, children, crossed from Hispania into North Africa. Not by wind, but by opportunity. Led by King Genseric, they rode on the collapse of a fading Roman Empire. In less than a decade, they seized Carthage, broke Rome's control, and declared a new Vandal kingdom that stretched from Tingis in the west to Tripolitania in the east. For a moment, they were kings. The Vandals occupied Volubilis, moved through Sala Colonia, and stamped their rule on crumbling Roman towns. Mosaics were left to fade, Latin scripts were defaced, and Christian churches were burned. But here's the mystery. Despite their brutal advance, the Vandals left almost nothing behind in the DNA of Morocco. Modern genomic surveys, including 2020 deep-Y analyses and autosomal studies, detect less than 1% Germanic ancestry in Moroccan populations. A ghost trace. Why? Because the Vandals didn't build roots. They didn't intermarry. They ruled like raiders, not settlers. They brought no infrastructure, no institutions, no language that stuck. And by 534 AD, the Byzantines crushed their kingdom, sweeping in under Emperor Justinian I, reclaiming Roman Africa. What followed was chaos. Power flickered between distant emperors and local warlords. And into this fractured land, this exhausted land, came something far more permanent. A migration not of armies, but of identity. Because in 681 AD, a new power arrived, not just to rule, but to reshape Morocco's genetic destiny. What Rome and Carthage couldn't do in centuries, the Arabs did in decades. What if I told you that in just a few generations the face of Morocco changed forever? The first Arab armies crossed into the Maghreb as early as 670 AD under the Umayyad general Uqba ibn Nafi, weaving Islam, Arabic, and new governance into coastal towns. But the real transformation came in the 11th century when the Banu Hilal and Banu Sulaim, tidal waves of Arab tribes, were unleashed by the Fatimid Caliphate. Historians estimate between 250,000 to 1 million of these nomads poured into the Maghreb between 1051 and 1110 AD, chasing new pastures, new promise, new power. Their impact wasn't just cultural, it was genetic. Today, haplogroup J1M267, the signature of Arabian paternal lineage, accounts for nearly 30% of Moroccan Y chromosomes. And in areas like Algeria and Tunisia, rates climb even higher. This isn't a ghost imprint, it's biological truth. Settlers intermarried. Their dialects merged into Daria. Their names replaced older ones. And over time, any hint of Berber origin in many families became buried, if not forgotten. Scientific studies confirm it. A 2017 genome-wide analysis concluded these waves weren't cultural overlays. They were demographic storms that remodeled the very genetic structure of the Maghreb. Picture the plains of Morocco in the 12th century. Tents of Banu Hilal dotting the steppe, their herds grazing where wheat once stood, their songs in Arabic echoing across the Atlas valleys. Within a generation, language, law, and lineage had shifted, and yet, this dramatic shift buried an even deeper story. What if not all that Arab DNA came marching from the Arabian Peninsula? What if some of those lineages were already here, hidden, waiting, ready to be claimed? But what if not all that Arab DNA came from Arabia? A deeper ancestry hides within. The most common Arab lineage in Morocco might not be Arab at all. What if everything you thought you knew about identity was a misreading of history's handwriting? We often treat genetics like a fingerprint. a direct line from our present to our past, but sometimes the signal lies, or at least it hides. Take haplogroup J1-M267, the same lineage we just traced to the 11th century Banu Hilal migrations. It's common in Arabia, yes, but when scientists started peeling it back, subclade by subclade, a different picture emerged. Some branches of J1 are ancient, not just pre-Islamic, but pre-Arabic. Researchers found subclades like J1P58 that existed in Neolithic Levantine farmers over 9,000 years ago. Long before the Quran was ever recited, long before the desert became a source of empire, these lineages were farming, sailing, settling across the eastern Mediterranean. And then there's J2, often lumped into the Arab category, yet deeply connected to the Punic world, Anatolia, and the early Bronze Age Levant. Studies of ancient remains from sites like Bursa in Tunisia and Sidon in Lebanon reveal J2 lineages centuries before Islam spread. So when we say Arab DNA in Morocco, are we naming an origin or echoing a conquest? Because what seems like a genetic marker of the 11th century may, in truth, be a Mediterranean relic thousands of years old, adopted, reshaped, renamed by waves of empire. In genetic terms, we call this convergent ancestry, when the same marker shows up in different times and places for different reasons. A borrowed mask, a traveling name. And this isn't just science, it's deeply personal. Because millions of Moroccans walking the streets today, speaking Arabic, praying in Arabic, may carry a legacy far older, far more diverse than they've ever imagined. But in this dense genetic mosaic, one lineage still towers above the rest. Every empire tried to overwrite it. None succeeded. It wasn't written in stone. It wasn't inscribed on a column. It was written in blood, older than Carthage, older than Rome, older than the word empire itself. This is the story of EM81. Imagine this. Roughly 14,200 years ago, as Ice Age shackles melted, a man outside the cave of Taforalt, or in the Rif Mountains, carried a Y chromosome mutation so enduring it still echoes in millions of Moroccan men today. That mutation is E-M81. Walk through any Amazigh village today under the cedar skies of the high Atlas across the terraced fields of Toubkal, and 60 to 80% of the men carry EM81. It's not just a marker. It's a shrine, a testament. Even when Carthage sent its traders, Rome raised its standards. The Vandal horsemen thundered, or Byzantium reached across the Mediterranean. This lineage stood undefeated. It was not won by conquest. It was preserved by people rooted in these mountains, these valleys, these stones. People who wore Latin armor, spoke Arabic, but whose fathers and sons still carried the same ancient line. In the 21st century, as the Amazigh have rekindled their language, their tattoos, their festivals, the Tamazight revival, EM81 became more than DNA. It became identity. Not a relic of the empire, but a lifeline to the land. The paradox is striking. Empires erased alphabets, laws, even languages. Yet their battles, their treaties, their grand histories, they could not erase a code embedded in the bone. E-M81 survived because identity isn't just taught, it's carried. And as we stand at the crossroads of story and genome, we see that this ancient lineage didn't just survive, it endured at the core of who Morocco has always been and remains. But how did all these stories, erased and surviving, get preserved at all? Not every story is lost to war. Some vanish in silence. There's a kind of forgetting that doesn't need fire or sword. No invasion, no forced exile, just silence, quiet disappearance over time. It's called genetic drift. Imagine a Roman soldier in Tingis. His blood mixed with a local woman, his child born under olive skies. He lives, he dies, his name fades. But his DNA should stay. Only it doesn't, because not every lineage survives. Through pure chance, some lines end. Sons don't have sons. A rare Y chromosome mutates. A daughter carries no paternal signature forward. And over generations, entire genetic stories simply dissolve, not erased by violence, but by math. In population genetics, this randomness is terrifyingly precise. Statistical models show that even a dominant haplogroup can vanish in small populations. A once common Phoenician subclade, gone in 5 generations. A Roman mitochondrial line, swallowed by centuries. It's like losing a voice in a crowd that keeps getting louder. And what's left, that isn't the full picture, it's just what managed to hold on. Survivors of a random lottery written in flesh. So when we say there's no Roman DNA in modern Moroccans, that's not proof of absence. That's the echo of a disappearance. 1,000 Etruscan graves, 1,000,000 unwritten lullabies, vanished without rebellion, without war, just quietly drifted out of time. Because in the grand archive of our species, DNA is not a historian, it's a survivor. And it doesn't always remember the loudest, just the longest. So what can DNA tell us about who we are and who we were? Who are we when the ruins say one thing and the DNA says another? Stand in the shadow of Volubilis at sunrise. Touch the fallen Latin inscriptions, hear the wind pass through what was once a Roman forum. The stones speak of empire, columns, mosaics, the bones of law. But under those very stones, the DNA tells a different story. The builders, it whispers, were mostly Berber. Not the senators, not the generals, the people. Volubilis, Lixus, Tingis, cities drawn in Roman lines but carried on Berber shoulders. Stones shaped by empire but rebuilt, preserved, and lived in by those never written into the official history. And this is where the contradiction becomes something deeper. Because the ruins remember conquest, the DNA remembers survival, and the stories passed from grandmother to grandson, those remember identity. The genome is not a biography, it's a fragment, a shard of light. It cannot tell you what prayers your ancestors whispered, what gods they feared, what dialect their lullabies held. But it can show you how far they walked, how often they were conquered, and how rarely they disappeared. Because every time the empire knocked, Morocco bent, but it never broke. Its people took in new names, new alphabets, new gods, and made them their own. So when you read your ancestry report and it says 20% Arab, 10% Iberian, 2% Levantine, 60% Berber, it isn't just science. It's survival in numbers. You are not Roman, not Phoenician, not Arab. You are all of them and more. In the next episode, the Berber DNA trail across Iberia. Did North Africans colonize Spain?